It's time for that podcast where imposter syndrome meets genuine expertise. You're listening to FounderQuest.
So, John, I want you to tell me everything you know about falconry.
A lot more than I did 5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I need to hear this story. That's like birds, right?
Yes. Yep. We randomly did a falconry thing at the Biltmore when we were in Asheville. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I mean, it might be cool. Birds. I've seen birds. And my wife was like, no, this is my destiny. And so they only had one ticket available. So she went, and I was able to observe. And then one of the guys who went, like, randomly was like, I think a little bit creeped out by the birds. And he only did like one of his. And he was like, hey, do you want to do my other turn? And I was like, yes.
Heck yeah.
So I got to have a falcon land on, I was holding a little piece of, I don't know, squirrel meat or something. And it landed and ate it, and I passed it off to the other guy. It was pretty cool.
Nice. So, good vacation?
Yes, very good vacation. And falconry was definitely probably a top 10 animal experience for me. I would highly recommend it if anyone gets a chance. It sounds weird, but it was really cool. So,
Well, if you hadn't noticed by all the gear in Auburn, eagles are a very big part of our tradition. So at the start of every football game, the eagle flies around the stadium like 10 feet above the crowd, does a big loop, and then dive bombs into the middle. So I believe you 100% on how awesome it was being the person actually catching a bird on your hand to eat something off of it. That's wild.
I've never thought about that with Auburn. Like, I know that, but for some reason it never connected that they would just have an eagle at the game.
It's one of those things where, like, you don't really notice it on TV, but when you're there, it's like pretty electric in the stadium. Everyone just gets really into it. The things that sports brings to communities, you just get really super into very niche, weird things where everyone just thinks the bird flying around and landing on a field is just the greatest thing ever. And it is when you're there, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely this learning how they actually accomplish that, because birds are birds. And what that eagle wants to do is it wants to eat the most tasty thing that it can eat. And so to actually make it happen, I guarantee they have to keep that eagle pretty hungry for it to go exactly where they want and stuff like that. So I learned a little bit about that now.
Well, that's a bit more cool than the LSU mascot, with Mike the Tiger. He's great, but he's just hanging out in a cage.
Never been to a LSU game. Do they bring a live tiger out onto the field?
No, they do not bring a live tiger out onto the field, unfortunately. No.
We don't want that one eating the tastiest thing.
Right, yeah. You don't keep that guy hungry. Well, in case you're curious about the voices you hear today, we have John Nunemaker rejoining us. Welcome back, John, from your vacation.
Thank you. And
we have Will King, a new guest on the episode. So Will's at Crunchy Data, and we're going to be talking today about some stuff that Will's been doing. And in case you don't know about college football in the United States, Will went to Auburn. I went to LSU. We're both Alabama natives. We just discovered that we had that connection, so it's fun.
Yeah. It's okay. I'm not the crazy fan, so I don't hold it against you.
It's okay. I actually dislike both of you now because I'm a Notre Dame fan. So it's good.
Oh, well, it's okay because everybody else dislikes you. So it's
yeah,
fine.
Yep. We're all used to it.
Well, Notre Dame lost their coach to LSU, so I can understand why you might have some animosity there.
You know, that we were actually pretty happy about, but we're pretty happy with Marcus Freeman now. So
nice. I have to admit, I'm still pretty bitter about the whole Nick Saban thing because he left LSU to go to Alabama, but you can't blame the man, but still I blame the man.
It's okay. You can blame him. Nobody likes Alabama.
So I was actually reading an article this week. It's talking about Nick Saban. He popped up in the news again and talking about how it's called the Nick Saban butterfly effect. And he moves on from Alabama, and then it affects all these other programs because coaches are shuffling to fill in the Alabama spot and then filling in whatever spot they left, down even to the high school level. I think that's pretty wild.
Oh, man. That is wild. And and then you think about if Saban left, he had been curating a bunch of pretty high-level coaches who are probably also getting offers to, like, different programs.
Yep.
And then they get moved around. Man, I can only imagine. That's crazy to think about. With development, there's such a huge industry of businesses and such a large pool of available workers that there's not really tectonic shifts like that. But in, like, college sports, there's only so many D1 teams and D1-worthy coaching. So I can imagine the butterfly effect that would cause for sure.
Yeah.
Now all I can think about is that Ashton Kutcher movie.
Yep.
That's going way back.
When I was younger, it was like, back when you would just flip through the channels and just see what was on, and then that would come on, And I just remember being like maybe 13 or 14 and just being like, this is the trippiest thing I think I might have ever seen in my life. And,
Yep.
Man.
So, John, Notre Dame going all the way this year?
I don't know. I just choose not to believe it. I believe that, like, every team that I cheer for, it's just like they got a knack for losing. Like LeBron with the Cavs going down 3-1 and coming back, that's the pinnacle for me. It won't ever happen again. That was my only chance to really be a part of a run. So I don't think anything's going to happen with it. My favorite TV shows always get ended. I just expect it to not happen. So if they do, great. That would be fantastic.
You and my wife would get along very well. My wife is very much let's just assume nothing good is coming from this and we'll just plan for the worst. Whereas I'm the opposite, where it's like, well, sure, we can be ready for the worst, but let's assume everything great is going to happen to us.
Yeah. I'm only that way in like sports and TV. That's it. Everything else, I'm like very optimistic, but in sports, I'm just like, nope, I've been burned too many times. So we'll see. We've always got a good crew up here and people love football and it's a lot of fun. I had season tickets when we were 12 and then got smoked by Alabama. So I think after that, it just left a little bit of a burnt taste in my mouth. And so I try not to get it too into it.
If you want to get used to the feeling of being smoked by Alabama, just become an LSU fan, because happens to us all the time.
Anywhere in the SEC.
Well, we're not actually talking about football today. Today we're talking about shipping software, because that's what we do at our respective companies. So, Will, you're at Crunchy Data. What do you do over there, and what does Crunchy Data do?
So I am a design engineer. I work on the front end team and do a lot of front end development, but I also manage a lot of the design that goes into our product, specifically for our dashboard interface. But at Crunchy, we are a managed Postgres provider. My boss, Craig, who's very, very well known in the Postgres world, his favorite thing to say is, we're just Postgres, but we just do it really good. Our main priority is enabling the best out-of-the-box configuration that you don't have to worry about, and then pairing that with rockstar support. That is probably a part of this that I will dive into as we start talking about shipping. That just is such a superpower at Crunchy, is we have maybe some of the most knowledgeable support members on our team, and it is just so much fun working with them, because I am, as I mentioned, design engineer. I'm painfully like on the front side of most of the technology stack. I've dove a little into the back end and definitely more into the database now, having worked at Crunchy, but like my knowledge there is just very shallow compared to my other expertise, and being able to pair with really expert support just is such a superpower at our company, and not being afraid to just pull on that support. And they're very willing to jump in on just about any problem and like excited to do it. So it's a really fun place to work.
Yeah, we're big fans of Crunchy at Honey Badger. We've used them for a while now. Can't think about how long, a couple of years at least. And yeah, big fan of Craig, even though he's always wearing his Alabama cap. Still, I can forgive him for that.
When I was interviewing, I think I joined about 2.5 years ago when I was interviewing, and I got on the call and I was wearing my Auburn gear. He was like, "That's it. Cancel it, you're out."
We're done.
The big rivalry. And then, later on, he's just like, actually, when I saw that, I was very excited, because he's an Alabama boy originally. And he lives in San Francisco. It's like, I've never worked with anyone from Alabama before, much less a rival fan.
Right.
So this is going to be lots of fun. And it's just all the time, especially in football season. He's not afraid to just give you a hard time in Slack, making fun of your team for losing. So it's a pretty fun place to work.
Craig is solid. And I think Crunchy Data's support is fantastic. We've had good interactions with them. We've had times like hopping on Zoom calls and debugging an issue together. It's been fantastic. And we feel strongly about that at Honey Badger, about providing great support to our customers. And so it feels good to be partnered with a company that feels the same way. John, you use Crunchy, don't you?
We currently don't. We use Heroku Postgres just because we're super lazy. I've been looking at Crunchy a lot, mostly.
First of all, how dare you? Just kidding.
So again, that just historically, we've used it for like, I don't know how many years. And so we just haven't moved off of it. But I looked at Crunchy quite a bit because there's a lot more opportunity for like extensions and other things. I feel like you guys support like Hyperlog and some of that stuff. And I've been wanting to use that again because I used it back when I was at GitHub and haven't in a while. And so now that I've been doing some analytics again, I've been thinking about that. So it's definitely something we've been looking at a lot.
If you're looking into analytics, then we actually just recently dropped an analytics focused Postgres cluster.
Oh, cool.
That is like specifically, they're doing some stuff with DuckDB and Iceberg format and all sorts of stuff where it's just Postgres. You can query using Postgres, but it's super fast under the hood. I'm not the expert, even though I built some of the stuff in the UI. So definitely reach out to our support, and they can definitely give you the rundown. They love talking about it. But
That's cool. And it makes a lot of sense.
if you want to migrate from Heroku, we may or may not have actually written a migrator that does it automatically for you.
Oh man, I've moved so many services on all kinds of different things, and it gives me like the shudders every time. I totally understand people and like how they're selling a dev tool. Also, it's like people are slow sometimes to switch, but it's like, you switch a lot, and anytime you migrate, there's always like little things that surprise you. My current thing that I will never switch again is support tools. I am just like, I will use the same support tool for the rest of my life. I've switched so many times, and then it's like a chaotic disaster because this help doc didn't work, or this other thing, or now they can't access this, URL history or that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's funny how that works out. I was thinking though, when you were talking about support, how great it is to have, I feel like it's required the deeper in the stack you go. And when you get to the point of hosting your hosting state, that's the most critical spot in anybody's stack. And so having like really technical support in that area makes complete sense to me. That's a very long-term focused thing to make that part really good.
And it's such an interesting area too, like when you think about these type of infrastructure-y type tools. There are some dev tools where it's like, hey, we make this like very standard thing just easier for you, so you don't have to think about it. But then there's like this layer of tooling, like you mentioned, where it's like, we're with you on a journey. You may have become our customer when you were smaller, and I'm sure you are very familiar with this, Ben. Like, you may only be getting a few like reporting cases from a customer, and then they're with you for 5 years, and you're getting like hundreds of thousands or something. And same with like databases and stuff, where it's like customers scale with you, and you learn just as much about their business, being part of their growth and supporting their infrastructure. And you get a different view on their company, like you get a view on how much they're getting used, like where they're running into bottlenecks, what places. And so like our support team gets to talk to us a lot about that, where it's like you see this unique perspective of, oh, well, they're continuing to run into bottlenecks here and here. And when you share that with them, like we've got very product focused support team as well. So like they'll share that with customers when they're talking to them at times. One of Craig's favorite things to say to me and the rest of the front end team is we're the ideal customer, not front end developers, but like people who don't know that much about databases. We want to bring people on who don't have to be DBAs to be able to be good at having a good database supporting their product. And it shows in kind of the people that they hire and the way the support team approaches their work. I work at a place where I get to be the dumbest person in just about every room, and that's like the best thing that I could possibly hope for.
Yeah, it's awesome to be able to learn from others and get exposed to things that aren't necessarily your bread and butter.
Yes, which brings me to like why I was excited about this topic and to talk with y'all specifically about it, because I mean, both of y'all have been shipping, and I'm a lot more familiar with, Honey Badger, but what is it? Y'all started in 2013?
2012. Yeah.
2012. So like you're on 12 years of shipping product, and like I've formulated from the article clearly like some opinions on how I ship and how I like to maintain product velocity, but there's just this narrow scope in which the type of companies that I've worked at and like the length of my career. I just thought it'd be super interesting to just get your take on having shipped for as long as y'all have, like how much of that resonates, like what's different, what might be missing, and also just talk about like my take as well, because it is working at Crunchy Bridge, and there's like nuggets of it that I think are true no matter how long your company's been around, but I feel like there's definitely areas where things can change depending on the stage that your company's at.
Yeah, and this is a topic that I think we discussed recently on the podcast about when you're thinking about minimum viable products, what exactly constitutes a minimum, because for us, like you said, talking about things change over time. When we first launched, right, the minimum viable product was, okay, it's got to be able to record an exception, put it in a database, and show it to the user. Like that was pretty much it. It's like, oh, let's do what Airbrake is doing, but better, right? So that was pretty straightforward and simple. But fast forward 12 years, and it's like, okay, we want to launch this new insights thing. Well, that's a bit more involved now than it was 12 years ago. We can't just throw it out on one server and hope for the best like we did back then. But now we have to actually, people expect us to have a certain, resiliency story and a certain capacity story, and we can't just let everybody in and hope for the best. We have to plan for, a certain amount of support and a certain amount of doneness. So the minimum bar goes up, I think, as you get longer into it. John, you're nodding your head, so tell me what you're thinking.
I'm nodding my head because I'm thinking, this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is do we actually have to do that, or is there ways to go back to the beginning and just ship stuff really quick. That's this thing. Sometimes I feel like we're going through sludge on Flipper, and it's just moving slow, and we're like operating like we're GitHub, and we're not. We're at the very beginning. But I have Box Out, which is the opposite, and it's been around a long time and stuff like that. But I think about it the same way on both of them, is like, how do you pick up the pace? It's like, how do you increase the velocity? It's been like this thing that's really been in my head a lot. I think there's ways to like not drop the quality too much and still move faster. When you were talking about that, what I was thinking about right away and why I was nodding my head is basically like, well, what could you have done to do that path with Insights? Like, could you have shipped it to like the first customer and then let them hit some issues and then ship it to like let 5 more in and then let 5 more in, like do more of a controlled release? And would that have made it easier, knowing that like at some number of customers we're definitely going to have to rewrite it? But I don't know. What I'm curious about, I guess, is this point is like, is it because we get more experienced over time that we demand more of ourselves, or do our customers demand more, or do we just think that they demand more? And I don't know what the right answer is, but that's been in my head a lot the last like 2 months.
Yeah. I think it's all the above, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I think it snowballs, and I've not been in a product that, like, Crunchy's been around for a long time, but I've not been on a team. I think I was on a team for 7 years when I was a very early developer, so I didn't have a lot of opinions. I didn't know how to think through these kind of things. But as I've gotten more experienced, I've spent 2 to 3 years at a company at a time, so there's not just this like huge timeline that I've built these things up at. But what I've noticed with Crunchy, what we do different is it's a top-down culture. You know, like Craig is Mr. Velocity. Like he finds shipping and shipping quickly to be an important quality. And I think a lot of times one of those factors that can break that down is when you have bureaucracy as the culture, or when you have perfectionism as the culture, or you have, like, there's something about the culture that pushes back on, and some of that, we talked about this for a while when I was writing this article originally, where he talks about it's like some of it's just people are scared. They're scared to mess up. They're scared to get something wrong. Business people are scared for numbers to not look as good as they could have. People aren't as connected to their customer. They're connected to metrics, and they're so concerned about those things that they don't experiment. And when you kind of lose that process of experimentation, so in the article I talk about shipping in layers, and it matches exactly what you're talking about, where I think with every problem, and I think the greatest, one of my favorite articles of all time written on the Smart Bear blog, SLC, which I think everybody has probably read, that is in products at this point, small, lovable, complete. That's talking about like products as a whole. Like there's this concept of an MVP, but there's also this concept of something that's small, lovable, and complete. Like there's this core problem that if you just solve it in a complete and well done way, you can get what a customer needed out of your business, and you build on it from there. I think that concept applies to like everything that comes across my desk as a engineer, designer, a builder for this company. Like everything that comes across my desk as a task to use can be broken down to some small, provable foundation that's like, this is why we think this feature is valuable, and this is the thing that proves that. Where a lot of times if you plan out this feature, and as a business, you're like, this is exactly what it needs to be. It's got these bells and whistles because customers are going to love it. And you do this thing and you make sure it's perfect and it's got this nice little bow on it, and you ship it and you realize what the customer actually wanted was just like slightly different up here, or like very different up here. But when you open yourself up to those integration points, what you realize is, oh, I'm like slightly off trajectory. Like they like this part of it, but they need this instead of what we thought, so we changed that here. Oh, we overcorrected, let's change it back this way. And like you give yourself more chances to course correct, to actually land where the customer wants you than where you thought the customer wanted you.
Yeah. Have you seen that image, that comic image of the tree swing? And like what customers wanted, and what project management described, and what developers understood, and what finally got delivered? You haven't seen that? It's awesome.
I haven't, but it sounds like a very classic one.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. It is a classic. But basically, it ends up with like a tree cut in half, and the swing is right in the middle, in the gap there. And yeah, it's great. But you described something that I've thought of in building a way of broad then deep. Like I've done a lot of like 0 to 1, helping an entrepreneur go from idea to something. And so often, I think developers, we want to dive in deep to a thing and let's make this awesome. Like you said, like everything from soup to nuts and put this big bow on top. But I find that if you actually do the broad thing first, like let's hit all of the basics, right? And let's not dive deep on anything yet. And then, okay, once we feel like, hey, this is kind of working, then we come in and start to embellish, start to add on. We did a very similar kind of thing with Insights. Like we just, okay, now you can query your data. Okay, now you can visualize your data. Okay, now you can interact with this pop-up tooltip thing, which is super cool. But if we had focused on that particular use case from zero, then we probably never would have gotten around to some of the more critical things. And even today, like we don't have alarms yet. And that's kind of important for a bunch of data coming in, right? So that's the next thing we're working on. That's going to be layered on top of what we have. But people can still get benefit out of being able to run the queries if they don't have visualization. They get benefit out of the visualization even if they don't have alarms yet, right? So I think being the broad base and then building deep into that on top of that is the way to go, for sure.
Yeah, it's the same thing on Flipper. We recently did analytics just, so you could see how many checks were happening and the true false counts and stuff. And it was like, to start, I literally just built like, okay, first it's just every single check event is going to get, shipped up, and then we're going to batch process them and store these perfect things. And then I was like, oh, that's a lot of throughput. Okay, let's just slim it down to like minute summaries, of true, false, feature name, things like that to reduce the throughput to us. And again, you lose some of the raw data, it's fine. But we got that all working, and then we got it working for ourselves. We let a couple of customers have it, and literally it's just integrated in a couple spots. Like the first thing was, when was this feature last accessed in this environment? So you can see this feature hasn't been accessed in production for 3 months, so you can probably delete it. It's fine. And so that started going into the delete form, and then it started going into the edit form, and then it was like, oh, well, you want to see it over time to see if it's generally rolling things out the way you expect. So I added like a last 24 hours Heroku metric style graph. And then it was like, hey, yeah, okay, this kind of works. Let's just turn it on for everybody. So we turned it on the client side, and then it was like within a month or so, it was like, nope, I did not aggregate enough. I needed like hourly aggregations. And again, I knew I was going to need hourly aggregations, but I was like, maybe I can go for a while like this. And the nice thing is if you do know you're going to need those, you know exactly how to fix it. So it's like a few hours or whatever, and you're done. But yeah, it's like that same kind of layered is really a good way to describe it approach, where you start with like, well, the basics are we just need some events coming in, then we need some reports on those events, and then we need more efficient on the way in, then we need more efficient on the way out, and you just keep, and then it's like, well, we need more time frames, and so it's natural, just like you're talking about with Insights and with the other thing, to layer them like that, and then you actually feel like you're making a good amount of progress each time as well. It's not like you're not biting off this massive amount and not getting it actually shipped until all of those things are done. And then that stuff lives in your head for like a month or two, and you have this huge PR, and you put it out, and everybody just says thumbs up, looks good, because it's too much to even look at.
There we go. That's the hidden cost.
Yeah. So yeah.
When you say it the way you just said it, there are two things that popped out while you were talking. The first one being the layered approach also gives you insight into if it's being used. Yeah. Like there may have been 6 things that you thought had to be included, or 6 things that a product manager or somebody who is helping with the feature thinks needs to exist. And if you're shipping them in layers, you get feedback from customers and realize, oh, like nobody is even using this. Like before you wasted all that time and effort that could be spent somewhere more valuable, you find out a lot sooner, oh, this isn't even being used. We thought this was a great idea, and so we built it, and they aren't even using it. You find that out a lot sooner. And that got me thinking about it, because it sounds like you've got something that is super valuable just built into your own product to dog food, where you can see very specifically where things are being used and things are not being used. And we get that too, where it's like, oh, we haven't heard any bugs about this thing we launched a month ago, like not even one. So if we've not even heard one bug, like we're all pretty good developers, but we're not that good, so like, okay, this must not be used too much yet. If it's not being used too much yet, like, well, let's focus our efforts somewhere else until we do start hearing more chatter about it, that kind of thing. And then the other one was when you're saying all of that, like, well, you add this on, and then we needed to do this. And they're like, well, if we're doing that, then we got to do this. Like, you can see how if the culture is not to ship things, to push things to production, you can see how that gets brought up in some meeting by someone along the way, and everyone just agrees, oh, you're right. We need to do that before we can push anything out.
Yep.
And it's very understandable to see how teams can get lost. And that's what Craig told me, like, he feels so strongly about it now. He would just watch teams when he was at Heroku just grind to a halt because of that. They would just get so concerned that everything that got brought up that sounded important and sounded like it needed to be taken care of, it did need to be taken care of, but it didn't have to be taken care of for anything to be shipped of value.
Yeah, the last year or so, my quote that I've been trying to live by is bias towards action. There's this great, have you guys ever read Fighting a Hydra? Or it's something like that. It's like one of my favorite, like the creative journey books ever. I think it's like How to Fight a Hydra is the name. And basically the first half of it is a fiction story about a knight who tries to take on a Hydra, which is like a 7-8 headed, some kind of mythical creature. I'm not real great at fiction. And then the second half of it, they apply what the knight did and like how the knight approached it. And that's how they were, I'm not going to hashtag spoiler alert, kill the Hydra. But it's a great book, and one of the things that's in the book is the knight just like tries to get farther and farther and closer to the Hydra each day slowly. First he tries to go all the way in and take on the Hydra, and he almost dies, and it's that kind of stuff. And so one of the quotes was like, rumination, basically like the root of all evil, only action shows you what needs to happen next. That book was probably 3 or 4 years ago for me, but I have it on a Yeti. I took the quote and I put it on a Yeti, so every morning when I would drink my coffee, I would see it. There's some brand placement. We've got to deal with Yeti today. But that quote really hit me, but then I didn't really live it out for a while, I feel like. But now just really the last year on both Box Out and Flipper, I've been thinking about that a lot, like this bias towards action. Because it's very easy when you get a group of people where if just one person is kind of then everybody else is like, well, maybe we shouldn't do it. And so like lately it's just more like whenever I feel like something needs to be done, I'm just like, I'll just do it. Worst case scenario, I say I'm sorry and somehow repair if it's wrong. But like biasing towards just doing something gives you more data than thinking about it.
There's this newsletter called Register Spill written by Thorsten Ball. He works at Zed, and he just wrote this one recently where it was the whole point of the newsletter was this concept of if you're doing something and it feels hard, it's because you haven't done it enough. And it's like very applicable to this. Shipping feels really hard when you don't do it that often, and it's very scary. You're worried about what people are going to think about the code that you write or the feature that you've built. But like if you can break it down to do something more often, and then Caleb Porzio, I feel like this is just, I guess, on a lot of people's mind, or I'm just like looking for it more because I've been writing about it. He like makes Livewire for the Laravel language, and he just had this episode of his show called Notes from Work where he talked about the journey back is always shorter. It's harder the first time you're doing stuff, but when you're coming back, you've been down the path before. It's the exact same distance, but because you know what to expect, it feels shorter. It feels easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, very applicable concepts, and I just love that, like that mentality. But it's hard sometimes in a job where, especially at a place like Crunchy, my wife tells me like, Will, you are overwhelmingly confident for no reason. You are confident about a lot of stuff that you have no reason to be confident about. I have it very luckily built into my personality traits to just be confident and just do stuff regardless of what other people think. And it's very lucky that's the case because at Crunchy there are like way smarter engineers, and you can easily get in your head when working in an environment with really smart people in engineering that like, oh, is what I'm doing as good as what they're doing? Are they going to think what I did was good? And that is also something that can surface a lot of times in a role if you've got a culture of that, or even sometimes the culture may not even be that way, but you may just personally struggle with that where it's just like you're worried about what others are going to think too. So like a lot of shipping velocity is just like encouraging people to do it and letting them know it's okay. And like the way you react when things do go wrong is not going to discourage them from doing it that way again, but is going to guide them into like, maybe there are processes, maybe there's like something, whatever the issue was, like you don't have to put that blame on them so that they're scared to do it the next time.
Yeah, I think developing that shipping muscle is definitely something. You can overcome that fear of it's not good enough or it's not ready yet, right? It's like, you just put it out there especially with using feature flags, right? You put it out there. If it's not good enough, then you can just turn it off easily, right? It's not a big problem. I think having the bias for action is something that we should definitely encourage, because I think a lot of engineers are pretty precious about, oh, it's not ready yet. It's not perfect yet. I need to polish it some more. And it's like, no, just ship it. It's fine. If it breaks, it's fine. Like, of course, Honey Badger, we make money from people shipping stuff that's broken, right? So you should definitely ship more stuff that's broken. But I think that, but jest aside, I think getting stuff out there sooner rather than later, even if it is somewhat broken, is okay. Like your customers hopefully love you, right? They're going to give you some grace, right? And if things are really, really broken, you can just turn it off with your feature flag and go fix it up. But I think one of the dangers of being, you can of course take that too far, right? The bias for action can get you in trouble if you just like, oh, I'm just going to throw some stuff out there. I'm not even going to think about exactly where I'm going. This article that you linked from Jason Cohen about the simple, lovable thing is great, except that I have an issue with, he uses the very famous image from Spotify, I think it was, the modes of transportation, like, this is not a minimum viable product with the one tire and then two tires and then the body frame. Right. He says you should instead make it a skateboard and then a scooter and then a bike and then a motorcycle and then a car. And I have problems with that because I like to ride motorcycles. I like to drive my car. I like to ride on my one wheel and I like to ride on my bike. And those are very different things, very different experiences. Like if you're setting out to deliver a car, it's not acceptable to me to deliver a skateboard first. Like I don't want a skateboard. I want a car, right? And so I think maybe a better image would be like, okay, give me a soapbox derby car, right? And then give me a go-kart and then give me a car, right? I think having a vision for what you want to deliver and then delivering on that vision is just as important as having that bias reaction and actually delivering something. And don't say, okay, well, we've got a login form so we can ship it. Well, no, you got to have something there, right? And it's got to be something along the lines of what you plan to get to eventually. So having that person on your team, at least, who's like thinking 6 steps ahead or 6 versions ahead, okay, we want to get here. And we don't have to launch there, but we want to get there. So what's the V1 going to look like to get us to the V6, which is our actual destination?
Right. The importance of, I saw it on Twitter, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, but it was that exact pushback, which was just this concept of everybody has gotten so caught up in the lean startup or the MVP or like shipping things that are small that they're shipping things that are bad. Like just because you're shipping quicker or you're trying to ship things in smaller increments doesn't mean you have to ship things that are worse. Like you can still ship things that are good. I like the word that you use, vision. We have somebody on our team who is very much I call him the sweeper, because he is very good about like coming back behind us, specifically me. As you can tell, I'm very much biased towards action, sometimes too much, as I'm sure my teammates could tell you at times, but he always comes back and he can clean up.
On our team, Kevin is really the deep thinker, the one who's like, okay, here are all the things we want to do. And I'm more of the shipper. And so I'm like, okay, Kevin, we need to ship. And he's like, but wait, And I think it's a good friction to have on a team, to have someone who's really thinking a few steps ahead and making sure you go in the right direction. And then someone who's also like, okay, now let's actually take a step.
Yeah. Yep. That I would say the same for us on Flipper. Like Garrett is more of the deep thinker. Like he goes all the way through and crosses every T and dots every I. And I'm like, let's just get it out. Like worst case scenario, if X number of customers complain or have problems, we can help them and then we get to talk to them. I almost like when problems happen and customers actually communicate with you, because customer as a developer, they're typically very quiet. Like they don't say a lot unless something's wrong. And so it's kind of good. Then when you get them on the horn, you can ask them other things. I've started even doing that on Flipper's repo. Like when people submit an issue, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll fix it up. And then I'll be like, also, if you have time to tell me about Flipper in general and how it's working for you and how it's not and all this, you can email me here, blah, blah, blah. Just because it's like, oh, I actually got a touch point with a person and got some feedback. So we had the same thing with a pricing version thing where he was like, well, we want to allow people to opt into the new pricing. We don't want to force it on them and then allow this. And I was like, this is just for like X number of customers who already exist, right? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, I'll do them by hand if I have to. We'll just put an email box there. And he's like, okay, yep, I can do that. He's like, I wouldn't naturally want to do that from the beginning. He wants to like make it work all the right way and stuff. But I'm like, when you're just trying to figure it out, or if the numbers are at a scale where you can do that, you can definitely shrink it back and just make it a manual thing. And I love the concept of a sweeper, because I have been a sweeper like my whole life, and I actually really enjoy sweeping. It's one of my favorite things to come in and clean things up at the end. So I was glad that you mentioned that even for a second, Will, because I think sweeping, again, since I love it, I think it's a very important role in every organization. So
this has been a fun chat. Thanks for taking time. I enjoyed getting to meet you, Will, and John. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you and get your insights. Cool. All right. Well, this has been another fantastic episode of FounderQuest. Glad you're here to join us, and hopefully you'll join us again next time. See you.
FounderQuest is a weekly podcast by the founders of Honey Badger. Zero instrumentation, 360-degree coverage of errors, outages, and service degradations for your web apps. If you have a web app, you need it. Available at honeybadger.io. Want more from the founders? Go to FounderQuestPodcast.com. That's one word, where you can access our huge back catalog of episodes. FounderQuest is available on iTunes, Spotify, and other purveyors of fine podcasts. We'll see you next week.